They thought they could laugh forever. They really believed that your silence meant you didn't know, that your calmness meant you were blind, that your grace was just another word for weakness. But tonight, everything shifts, because the joke they'd been playing at your expense just came to its final, devastating conclusion, and the look on their faces when they realized you knew everything all along, that's a moment they'll replay in their minds for the rest of their lives. Let's be absolutely clear about something before we go any further into this message. You've been carrying information like a loaded weapon you chose not to fire. You've been walking around with evidence, with receipts, with timestamps and screenshots and conversations and moments stored in your memory like a sacred archive. You didn't forget a single thing. You didn't miss a single detail. You simply chose to observe, to document, to hold space, to give them enough room to either step into integrity or dig themselves deeper into their own deception. And what did they do with that grace? They mocked you. They called you naive. They laughed behind your back while smiling to your face. They gathered in their little circles and made you the punchline of their stories, convinced that you were too pure, too trusting, too spiritually bypassed to see what was really happening. They treated your silence like confirmation of their superiority, your patience like proof of your ignorance. Every time you didn't react, they grew bolder. Every time you stayed calm, they assumed they had gotten away with it. But here's what they fundamentally misunderstood about you. Your silence was never submission. Your observation was never oblivion. You weren't giving them grace because you didn't know better. You were giving them grace because you knew exactly what was happening, and you were giving them the sacred opportunity to stop before the truth came crashing down like a tidal wave they never saw coming. And now that moment has arrived. The exposure is complete, the details are out, and the joke they thought was so funny, it's officially over. Let's talk about what your silence actually was, because this is where their entire misunderstanding began. They confused your quietness for weakness when it was actually weaponized awareness. They mistook your patience for ignorance when it was strategic restraint. They saw your gentleness and assumed you were an easy target, never realizing that soft water cuts through solid rock, not through aggression, but through persistence and absolute certainty of its power. You were never confused about what was happening. From the very first inconsistency, from the first time their story didn't match their energy, from the moment their words said one thing but their actions screamed another, you knew. You felt it in your body before your mind could even articulate it. That knot in your stomach, that subtle shift in the atmosphere when they entered the room, that inexplicable unease that had no logical explanation but was absolutely undeniable. Your intuition was screaming at you from day one, and you listened. You always listen. But instead of reacting immediately, instead of confronting them with half-formed evidence and emotional accusations, you did something far more powerful. You became still. You observed. You documented. You asked careful questions that seemed innocent, but were actually gathering information. You watched their patterns, noted their contradictions, memorized their tells. You became a silent witness to your own story, watching it unfold with the detachment of someone who already knows how it ends, because they're reading ahead while everyone else is still stuck on page 1. This is what made you so dangerous without them ever realizing it. They thought they were playing chess while you couldn't even see the board. But the truth? You were playing an entirely different game. One they didn't even know existed. While they were focused on their next deceptive move, you were building a case so airtight that when it finally came time to present it, there would be no room for excuses, no space for gaslighting, no possibility of them rewriting the narrative to make themselves look better. Carrying that knowledge was heavy, wasn't it? Walking around every day with the full picture while they continued to operate as if you were blind, that required a strength most people will never understand. Every conversation became a performance where you had to pretend you believed their lies while simultaneously cataloging each new deception. Every smile you gave them was an act of incredible self-control, because what you really wanted to do was confront them immediately and demand accountability. But you didn't. You held it. You carried that weight like a sacred responsibility because you understood something they never could. Exposure isn't about emotional release. It's not about winning an argument or proving you were right. Real exposure is about truth having its moment, about allowing deception to fully reveal itself, about giving people enough rope to either climb to safety or hang themselves with their own choices. And you were willing to bear that burden because you knew the timing had to be perfect. There were nights when the weight of that knowledge kept you awake, when you replayed conversations in your mind, when you questioned whether you should have spoken up sooner. There were moments of doubt when you wondered if maybe you were overthinking it, if perhaps you were being paranoid or judgmental. But then they would do something that confirmed everything. Some small action or comment that validated every single suspicion you had been quietly holding. And in those moments, you knew your silence was justified. What they never realized is that your ability to hold information without immediately weaponizing it is a sign of profound spiritual and emotional maturity. Lesser souls react instantly. Wounded egos need immediate validation. Insecure hearts demand instant justice. But you were operating from a completely different frequency. You understood that truth doesn't need to be rushed, because truth is patient. Truth knows that lies always collapse under their own weight eventually. Truth understands that the best revelations are the ones people discover for themselves, when the evidence is so overwhelming they can't deny it. Good. And then came the moment. Maybe it was something they said that contradicted every lie they'd told before. Maybe it was evidence you discovered that made the entire house of cards visible in one devastating instant. Maybe it was someone else coming forward with their own piece of the puzzle that suddenly made your entire collection of observations snap into crystal clarity. Whatever the catalyst was, that was the moment when silence was no longer an option. The shift happened inside you first. You felt it like a switch flipping, like a door closing on an old version of yourself that still believed in giving infinite chances. Something hardened in you, not out of bitterness, but out of absolute certainty. You were done protecting people from the consequences of their own actions. You were done making yourself smaller so they could feel bigger. You were done holding their secrets like they were yours to carry. The time for grace had passed. The season of revelation had arrived. When you began to speak, to show what you knew, to lay out the timeline and the evidence and the undeniable pattern of deception, something happened that you'd been waiting to see. Their faces changed. The confidence drained away like water through a broken dam. The smirks disappeared. The casual dismissiveness evaporated, and in its place came something you'd never seen from them before. Real fear. Not the dramatic kind, not the performative shock, but genuine terror of someone who suddenly realizes they've been caught and there's no way to talk themselves out of it. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't need to. You simply presented fact after fact, date after date, conversation after conversation. You showed them exactly what you knew, exactly when you knew it, exactly how you knew it, and with each revelation you watched them shrink. Every excuse they tried to offer was met with another piece of evidence that obliterated their attempt to reframe the narrative. Every time they tried to gaslight you, you pulled out another receipt that made gaslighting impossible. The most telling part wasn't what they said. It was how they reacted in those first few seconds before they could compose themselves. Some of them went completely silent, their minds racing to calculate damage control. Others became defensive immediately, which only confirmed their guilt more obviously. A few tried to laugh it off, to minimize the severity, to act like you were overreacting, but their energy told the truth. Their mouths were trying to hide. Watch what people do when they're genuinely exposed. They don't calmly explain themselves. They panic. They scramble. They try to shift blame, to make you the problem for bringing it up. to accuse you of being vindictive or unstable or obsessed. They'll say you're holding grudges, that you're bitter, that you're making mountains out of molehills. They'll try every manipulation tactic in the book, because when someone's lies are fully revealed, their only option is to attack your credibility for revealing them. But here's what made their reaction even more pathetic. They knew they couldn't actually deny what you presented. The evidence was too solid, too detailed, too irrefutable. So instead, they tried to make it about your character. Why were you keeping track? Why did you remember everything? Why didn't you say something sooner? The audacity of trying to make your awareness the problem instead of their deception is a level of deflection that would be impressive if it wasn't so transparent. Some of them tried to play victim. Suddenly they were the ones who were hurt, who felt betrayed, who couldn't believe you would do this to them. The sheer manipulation of trying to reframe themselves as the injured party when they were the ones who lied, who deceived, who violated trust repeatedly. That's the mark of someone who has never taken accountability for anything in their entire life. And watching them try that tactic while you stood there with undeniable proof of their deception, that was almost entertaining in how poorly it worked. The moment you exposed everything, the entire dynamic shifted. They had been operating from a position of perceived power, believing they had control of the narrative, thinking they could manage your perception and keep you in the dark indefinitely. But the second you revealed that you knew everything, that you had always known, that you had been giving them chances to come clean that they never took, the power structure completely inverted. Suddenly you weren't the one who needed to prove anything, they were. You weren't the one scrambling to explain, they were. You weren't the one whose credibility was in question, they were. And that shift was so disorienting for them because they had spent so long believing they were in control that watching that control evaporate in real time broke something in them. The mask slipped. The performance ended. And what was left was just a person confronted with the undeniable truth of their own deception. This is what happens when someone who has been strategically silent finally speaks. The impact is seismic, precisely because it's been building. Every lie they told added weight to the eventual revelation. Every time they thought they got away with something, they were actually making the final exposure more devastating. They constructed their own destruction with each deceptive choice, and you simply held the mirror up at exactly the right moment to show them what they had built. The beauty of this moment is that you didn't need to convince anyone. The truth spoke for itself. You didn't need to argue or debate or defend your position. The evidence was overwhelming. You didn't need to make them admit what they did because their reaction already confirmed everything. The panic in their eyes, the stammering in their voice, the desperate attempts to minimize or deflect. All of it was confession without words. What they still don't understand is that this isn't just about one situation or one betrayal or one set of lies. This is about them learning something about you that they can never unlearn. They now know with absolute certainty that you see everything, that you forget nothing, that your patience is not ignorance and your silence is not weakness. They've learned that underestimating you is dangerous, that taking advantage of your grace has consequences, that playing games with someone who remembers the entire playbook is a losing strategy. From this moment forward, they will never look at you the same way. Every time they are around you, they'll remember this. Every time they consider lying to you again, they'll remember how completely you dismantled their last attempt. Every time they think about treating you casually or dismissing your awareness, they'll remember the moment they realized you were 10 steps ahead of them the entire time. You've fundamentally altered how they perceive you, and that shift is permanent. But more importantly, this moment changed something in you. You proved to yourself that your intuition is trustworthy, that your observations are accurate, that your strategic patience serves you powerfully. You demonstrated that you don't need to react immediately to every offense to eventually address it effectively. You showed yourself that you can carry uncomfortable truths without letting them consume you, that you can observe deception without becoming paranoid, that you can give grace while simultaneously protecting yourself. This is the kind of self-selection that doesn't come from external sources. Nobody can give you this. Nobody can teach you this. You had to walk through it, hold that weight, make that choice to finally speak and watch the truth land with devastating accuracy. And now you know with certainty that you can trust yourself, that your perceptions are reliable, that your strategy of observing before acting serves you well. What made this exposure even more powerful is that it didn't happen in a vacuum. Other people witnessed it. Other people saw you present your case with calm certainty. Other people watched them scramble and deflect and panic. Other people got to see the contrast between your composed truth-telling and their chaotic defense mechanisms. And those witnesses now have information they didn't have before. The people who believed their version of events, who thought you were the problem, who bought into their narrative about you, they just got a massive wake-up call. They watched someone they thought was honest and trustworthy get completely exposed as deceptive. They watched someone they thought was aware and insightful reveal themselves to be strategic and dangerous in the best possible way. The reputation shift isn't just about the person you exposed. It's about how everyone else now sees both of you. This is why people who operate with integrity don't fear exposure. This is why people who tell the truth can sleep peacefully while liars lay awake. This is why those who document and observe and hold space for truth are ultimately protected by that same truth. You don't need to defend yourself against lies when you have facts. You don't need to argue about perception when you have evidence. You don't need to convince anyone of anything when reality speaks for itself. The witnesses to this moment will carry this information forward. They'll remember when someone tries to gaslight them. They'll be more careful about who they trust. They'll pay attention to patterns instead of just words. They'll think twice before dismissing someone's quiet observation as ignorance. You didn't just expose one person's deception. You gave everyone watching a master class in why underestimating aware people is dangerous, why silence isn't always weakness, why patience can be the most powerful strategy of all. Now comes the interesting part, the aftermath. Because exposure doesn't end the story, it fundamentally rewrites it. They can't go back to treating you the way they did before. They can't pretend they didn't get caught. They can't erase the moment when their carefully constructed facade crumbled in real time. They have to live with the fact that you knew all along, that you gave them chances they never took, that you held power you chose not to use until the perfect moment. Some of them will try to make amends. They'll come back with apologies, with explanations, with promises to do better. And you'll have to decide if those apologies are genuine or just another manipulation tactic to regain access to you. You'll have to discern between someone who genuinely understands what they did and why it was wrong versus someone who's just sorry they got caught and is trying to manage the damage to their reputation. Others will double down. They'll continue trying to make you the villain of their story. They'll tell anyone who'll listen that you're vindictive, that you're obsessed, that you're the real problem. Let them, because anyone with discernment will see through that immediately. Anyone with awareness will recognize someone trying to paint their accuser as the problem to avoid accountability. And the more they talk, the more they reveal about themselves. And then there will be the ones who simply disappear, who realize that there's no coming back from this, that the bridge is burned beyond repair, that the relationship or friendship or connection is over. They'll quietly remove themselves from your life. And honestly, that's the best possible outcome. Because people who can be exposed so completely were never meant to stay in your space permanently. They were lessons disguised as people, and once the lesson is learnt, their exit is the natural conclusion. The fact that you carried this knowledge without it destroying you says everything about your character. Lesser people would have crumbled under that weight. Weaker souls would have needed to expose everything immediately just to get relief from the burden of knowing. But you held it because you understood that timing matters, that strategy serves truth, that patience is power when wielded consciously. You proved that you can be in possession of information that could destroy someone's reputation and choose not to use it until absolutely necessary. You demonstrated that your character isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to respond. You showed that you can be powerful without being cruel, strategic without being manipulative, protective of yourself without being vengeful. This is the mark of someone who operates from genuine strength, not ego. Ego needs to prove itself constantly. Ego demands immediate validation. Ego can't tolerate being underestimated even for a moment. But strength, real strength, can afford to wait. Real strength doesn't need to announce itself. Real strength doesn't need to announce itself. Real strength understands that the best victories are the ones where truth does all the work, and you simply present the evidence at exactly the right moment. You also proved that you value your peace more than you value being right. You could have exposed them earlier. You could have caused drama and chaos and forced confrontation before you had all the pieces. But you waited because you knew that messy, emotional confrontations rarely lead to real resolution. You waited because you understood that clear, documented, undeniable truth is far more powerful than heated accusations. You waited because you respect yourself enough to do things the right way, not just the fast way. This exposure isn't just for the people you revealed, it's a message to anyone else who might be thinking about playing similar games with you. It's a warning to anyone who looks at your kindness and mistakes it for weakness. It's a demonstration to everyone in your orbit that you are not someone to be underestimated, that your awareness is sharper than they imagine, that your patience has limits, and when those limits are reached, the consequences are real. People talk, word spreads. The story of how you calmly, methodically, devastatingly exposed someone who thought they were playing you will become part of your reputation. And that reputation serves as protection. It creates a boundary without you having to constantly assert it. It makes people think twice before they decide to deceive you, before they choose to take advantage of your grace, before they mistake your spiritual maturity for naivety. Arguing? Compromising? This is how aware people move through the world. They don't need to be aggressive or confrontational to establish that they're not to be messed with. They simply demonstrate when necessary that they see everything and forget nothing. They show that consequences exist for those who violate trust. They prove that patience isn't permission to continue harmful behavior. It's an opportunity to correct course before accountability arrives. And the beautiful thing about operating this way is that good people, genuine people, trustworthy people have nothing to fear from your awareness. Only deceivers fear being seen clearly. Only manipulators are threatened by someone who remembers accurately. Only those with something to hide are uncomfortable around someone who observes keenly. Your awareness is a threat to exactly the people who should be threatened by it. For too long they controlled the story. They shaped how others saw you. They painted you as gullible or naive or too trusting. They made themselves look clever and you look foolish. They benefited from your silence while simultaneously using that silence as evidence of your ignorance. They built their image on the foundation of underestimating yours. But this exposure flipped the script completely. Now the narrative is about someone who was so far ahead that others couldn't even see the game being played. Now the story is about strategic patience and perfect timing and devastating accuracy. Now the tale being told is about someone who gave grace until grace was exhausted, who observed until the full picture emerged, who held power in reserve until the moment it was needed most. You've reclaimed your story, you've redefined how people see you, you've shifted from being underestimated to being understood as someone who should never have been underestimated in the first place. And that shift in perception changes everything about how people approach you going forward. It creates respect where there was dismissiveness. It generates caution where there was carelessness. It establishes your position as someone who operates from awareness, not ignorance. This is your narrative now, not the one they tried to write about you, not the one they wanted others to believe, the true one, the one where you were never the fool in the story, you were the observer, the documenter, the strategic force they never saw coming because they were too busy laughing at jokes that were never funny. And now that truth is out there, permanent and unchangeable. What they completely failed to recognize is that your entire approach came from a place of profound spiritual maturity. A less evolved soul would have reacted emotionally, would have lashed out immediately, would have needed to prove themselves right in the moment. But you understood something they didn't. You understood that real power isn't loud. Real strength doesn't need to flex. Real awareness operates silently until it's time to speak. And then it speaks with such clarity that no one can argue with what's being said. You gave them space to grow, to change, to step into integrity. You didn't immediately condemn them. You didn't rush to judgment. You observed and held space and gave them opportunity after opportunity to do better. That level of patience and grace doesn't come from weakness. It comes from someone who genuinely believes in the possibility of human growth and transformation. But you also understood that grace without boundaries is just enabling, that patience without consequences is just permission for continued harm, that holding space for someone's growth doesn't mean allowing them to repeatedly violate you while they figure themselves out. You knew when the season of giving chances had ended and the season of requiring accountability had begun. That wisdom, that discernment, that ability to know when to shift from patience to exposure, that's spiritual maturity in action. You honored both compassion and boundaries. You demonstrated both understanding and strength. You showed that it's possible to see someone's humanity while also holding them accountable for their choices. You proved that spiritual awareness doesn't mean being a doormat, that consciousness doesn't require self-abandonment, that being evolved means knowing when to protect yourself, even while wishing the best for others. But let's come back to where we started. The joke is over. It's not funny anymore. It never was, but now even they can't pretend it was. The laughter has stopped. The mockery has ended. The casual dismissiveness has evaporated. Because you didn't just expose their deception, you exposed the fact that they were the ones who didn't know what was happening. They were the ones operating blind. They were the ones who didn't see the full picture. They thought they were laughing at your expense, but the truth is, they were setting themselves up for the most humbling moment of their lives. Every joke they made, every time they smirked behind your back, every moment they felt superior because you stayed calm, they were actually digging themselves deeper into a hole they didn't even know existed. And when you finally revealed that you knew everything, that you had always known, the punchline landed on them with devastating force. The joke was never on you. It was always on them. They just didn't know it yet, but now they do. Now they understand that the person they thought was naive was actually the most aware person in the room. The person they thought they were fooling was actually documenting everything. The person they thought would never speak up was simply waiting for the right moment. And that realization, that crushing awareness that they were the ones being played all along, that's a lesson they'll never forget. This is what happens when people confuse kindness for weakness, when they mistake grace for ignorance, when they think silence means someone doesn't know. They set themselves up for exactly this kind of devastating exposure. They create the conditions for their own downfall and then act surprised when the consequences arrive. But you tried to warn them, not with words, but with chances. You gave them every opportunity to stop. They chose not to take it. So where do you go from here? You move forward with the clarity that comes from knowing you can trust yourself completely. You step into the next chapter of your life with the confidence of someone who has proven they can handle difficult truths with grace and deliver necessary revelations with precision. You walk into your future knowing that you're protected by your own awareness, defended by your own discernment, empowered by your own wisdom. You don't need to keep proving this. You did it once, and once was enough. The message is sent. The demonstration is complete. The lesson is learned by everyone who witnessed it. Now you get to simply live your life, knowing that you've established who you are and what happens when someone mistakes your spiritual maturity for something it's not. You've created a reputation that precedes you, that protects you, that ensures people think carefully before they decide to be anything less than genuine with you. And here's the beautiful part. You can go back to being your natural self. You can return to being kind and open and generous, because you know, and everyone around you knows, that underneath that gentleness is an awareness that misses nothing and a strength that, when necessary, strikes with absolute precision. You don't have to be hard or guarded or constantly defensive. You can be soft because your softness is backed by steel. Move forward with peace. Move forward with wisdom. Move forward knowing that you handled this situation with the exact perfect combination of patience and power. You gave grace until grace was exhausted. You observed until the full truth emerged. You held your power in reserve until it was time to use it, and when that time came, you used it with devastating effectiveness. That's not something to feel bad about. That's something to honor in yourself. If you're watching this right now, this message found you at exactly the moment you needed to hear it. Maybe you just went through your own exposure moment. Maybe you're still in the phase of carrying knowledge silently. Maybe you're preparing for the moment when you'll need to speak your truth. Wherever you are in this journey, know this. Your awareness is your power. Your ability to observe without immediately reacting is strength, not weakness. Your strategic patience is wisdom, not ignorance. Don't let anyone convince you that you're wrong for knowing what you know. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for eventually speaking truth. Don't let anyone shame you for having boundaries that, when violated enough times, become walls. You didn't create this situation. You simply responded to it with more grace than most people could have managed, and more strategic awareness than they could have anticipated. The joke is over, the games are done, the chapter is closed, and you're walking away from this situation not as someone who was played, but as someone who understood the entire game and chose exactly when to reveal that understanding. That's power, that's wisdom, that's mastery of self and situation. Be proud of how you handled this. Be confident in your awareness. Be secure in your ability to know when to speak and when to stay silent. To everyone else out there who might be watching this and thinking about the person in their life who they've been underestimating, who they've been taking advantage of, who they think doesn't know what's really happening, consider this your warning. Silence isn't ignorance. Patience isn't permission. Kindness isn't weakness. And the day someone finally speaks up and shows you exactly what they've been carrying, exactly what they've known all along, exactly how many chances they gave you to do better, that day will reshape how you see them forever. This is your moment. This is your vindication. This is your proof that trusting yourself was always the right choice. The joke is over. The truth is out. The exposure is complete. And you're standing in your power like never before. Walk forward knowing that you are seen, you are respected, and you are not someone to be underestimated ever again. End of story. This message resonated with you. If it hit you exactly where you needed to be hit, type exposed in the comments. Let me know you felt this. Let me know you understand, and make sure you subscribe, because we're just getting started with these truth bombs. Until next time, stay aware, stay strong, and never apologize for knowing what you know. Peace.